The letter trembled in her hands, its crimson wax seal already broken, the Duke's crest staring up at her like an accusation. Outside, the sound of horses' hooves echoed through the London fog. They were coming for her. She had 30 seconds to decide: burn the letter and deny everything, or run and risk losing him forever. The clock on the mantel struck midnight. Her heart made the choice before her mind could. What happens when love defies every rule of society? When a single glance across a crowded ballroom ignites a passion that could destroy 2 lives, or transform them forever? Let me tell you a story that begins on a cold October evening in 1887, in the glittering heart of London's Mayfair district, where the gas lamps cast their golden glow on cobblestone streets and the divide between the aristocracy and the common people was as vast as an ocean. This is the tale of 2 souls who should never have met, much less fallen desperately, dangerously in love. It's a story whispered in servants' quarters and recorded in secret diaries, a scandal that nearly brought down one of England's most powerful families and elevated a poor seamstress to a place in history she never sought. Gather close, for this is not just a love story, it's a story of rebellion, of sacrifice, of the courage it takes to choose your heart over your station. It's a tale of midnight meetings and stolen letters, of a society so rigid it could crush those who dared to step outside its boundaries, and of 2 people who decided that some things, some loves, are worth any price. I'm about to take you back to a world of strict propriety and even stricter consequences, where a woman's reputation was more valuable than her life, and where a duke's decision could alter the fate of hundreds. But beneath all that formality and restraint beat human hearts that longed for something society said they could never have. Are you ready to witness what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? When love collides with duty, and passion wars with propriety? Then let me introduce you to Edmund Ashford, the 5th Duke of Thornbury, and Rose Hartley, the seamstress who would change his world forever. The Duchess of Thornbury's annual autumn ball was legendary throughout London society. For weeks, seamstresses across the city had worked their fingers raw, crafting gowns of such extravagance that they seemed more like architecture than clothing. Among these skilled workers was Rose Hartley, 23 years old, with eyes the colour of storm clouds and hands steady enough to embroider a spider's web in silk thread. Rose had been summoned to the Thornbury mansion 3 weeks before the ball for a task that would seal her fate. The Duchess's gown had arrived from Paris with a tear in the bodice, and only the most skilled seamstress could repair it invisibly enough to preserve her Grace's dignity. The first time Rose entered Thornbury House, she felt as though she had stepped into another world. The entrance hall alone was larger than the entire building where she lived with 6 other families in Whitechapel. Marble columns reached toward painted ceilings where Greek gods cavorted among clouds. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, catching and scattering light into 1,000 rainbows. She was led through corridor after corridor by a stern-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Blackwood, whose keys jingled with each step like tiny bells announcing judgment. They passed rooms filled with treasures Rose couldn't even name. Paintings in gilded frames, sculptures of white marble, furniture that looked too delicate for actual humans to sit upon. "You'll work in the sewing room on the 3rd floor," Mrs. Blackwood informed her in tones that suggested Rose was dirt being swept into a corner. "You'll arrive through the servants' entrance at 6 in the morning and leave by 8 in the evening. You will not speak to the family. You will not touch anything except the materials for your work. You will not wander. Is that clear?" "Yes, Rose replied, though her independent spirit chafed at the dismissive tone. But Mrs. Blackwood didn't know about Rose's one defiant habit, her insatiable curiosity. And it was this curiosity that led to the moment that would change everything. On her 3rd day at Thornbury House, Rose finished her work early. The gown's repair was complete, so perfect that even she could barely see where the tear had been. It was nearly 7 in the evening, and she had an hour before she needed to leave. The house was preparing for a dinner party, and the servants were all occupied with preparations. Rose told herself she was only looking for the washroom, that she hadn't meant to wander down that particular corridor, past those particular doors, that she definitely hadn't intended to slip through the half-open door into the library that would later haunt her dreams. But she did. The library was magnificent. 2 stories of books bound in leather, their gold lettering catching the light from the fire burning in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. The room smelled of tobacco, old paper, and something else, something masculine and expensive that Rose couldn't quite name. She couldn't help herself. Rose approached the nearest shelf, her fingers trailing over the spines of books she'd only dreamed of reading. Dickens, Austen, Bronte, authors she knew from the penny dreadfuls she bought when she could spare a coin. But here they were in beautiful first editions, available to whoever lived in this house as casually as bread in a baker's shop. She pulled out a volume, Jane Eyre, and opened it with reverence. The pages were pristine, barely creased. Had anyone even read it? The thought made her oddly sad. All these beautiful stories, locked away in a room like prisoners in a gilded cage. I don't believe we've been introduced. Rose gasped and spun around, nearly dropping the book. A man stood in the doorway, tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes so intensely blue they seemed to see straight through her. He wore evening clothes of such perfect tailoring that they seemed like a second skin, and there was an air about him of command so natural he likely didn't even notice it. I'm sorry, sir," Rose stammered, clutching the book to her chest like a shield. I didn't mean to. Trespassing in my library." He raised one eyebrow, but there was something in his expression that wasn't quite anger. Amusement, perhaps. Or curiosity. "Stealing my books. I would never steal." Rose's pride flared despite her fear. "I was only looking. I'll go immediately." She tried to move past him, but he stepped into her path. Not threatening, exactly, but blocking her exit nonetheless. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his cravat was slightly loose as though he'd been tugging at it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Rose Hartley, sir. I'm the sempstress." Repairing her Grace's gown. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here, I know that, Rose." He said her name as though testing how it felt in his mouth. "Do you always apologize so much?" The question startled her into silence. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw something unexpected in those aristocratic features. Loneliness. Exhaustion. The weight of a life lived according to rules he'd never chosen. "Only when I'm caught somewhere I shouldn't be, sir," she replied, and was surprised to find a hint of defiance in her own voice. His lips curved into what might have been a smile. "Edmund," he said. "Sir." "My name. It's Edmund. Edmund Ashford." He paused, watching her face carefully. "Though I suppose you'd know me as the Duke of Thornbury." Rose's blood ran cold. The Duke. She'd been caught trespassing by the Duke himself. Mrs. Blackwood would dismiss her immediately. Worse, she might tell other households that Rose was untrustworthy. She'd never work in a decent home again. But the Duke Edmund didn't look angry. He looked interested. "Tell me, Miss Hartley," he said, gesturing to the book still clutched in her hands. "What do you think of Jane Eyre?" I've never read it, Your Grace. I can't afford books." "Then how did you know which one to pick?" Rose felt her cheeks flush. "I can read, sir. I taught myself. I read the ending in a shop once, standing by the window where the light was good. But I never learned how it began, or what happened in the middle." Something changed in Edmund's expression. The polite aristocratic mask slipped, just for a moment, and she saw genuine emotion beneath. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to one of the leather chairs by the fire. "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly. That wasn't a request, Miss Hartley." But his voice was gentle. "Sit, please." And so began the most dangerous hour of Rose Hartley's life. Edmund Ashford had been born into privilege so complete he'd never questioned it. His life had been mapped out before he drew his first breath: Eton, then Cambridge, then the management of estates spanning 3 counties. At 25, he'd married Lady Catherine Mortimer in a wedding so grand it had been written about in every newspaper in England. At 30, he'd become Duke when his father died of a heart attack in the middle of a parliamentary speech. Now, at 32, he was one of the most powerful men in England. He controlled the fates of thousands through his land holdings and political influence. He dined with the Queen. He could ruin a man with a word or elevate him with a smile. And yet, sitting across from a seamstress in his library, listening to her talk about books she'd only glimpsed through shop windows, Edmund felt more alive than he had in years. "So you never learned what happened to Jane?" he asked, leaning forward in his chair. "You don't know about Mr. Rochester's secret?" Rose shook her head, her eyes bright with curiosity. "I know she loves him, and I know there's something dark in his past. But the shop owner chased me away before I could read more." Edmund stood and walked to the shelf, pulling down not 1 but 3 volumes. "Take these," he said, holding them out to her. "Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, and Great Expectations. Read them. Tell me what you think." Rose stared at the books as though he'd offered her bars of gold. "Your Grace, I couldn't. These are valuable, and I'm only a what? A seamstress." Edmund's voice was sharp. "You speak as though your profession defines your worth. These are books, Miss Hartley. They're meant to be read, not locked away like museum pieces. Take them, please." Slowly, reverently, Rose reached out and accepted the books. Their weight in her arms felt like a sacred trust. "I'll guard them with my life," she whispered. "I know you will." Edmund smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to devastating. "Come back when you've finished them. We'll discuss them." "Come back. Here. To the library." "Why not? You've already trespassed once. Might as well make a habit of it." His eyes sparkled with mischief that seemed entirely at odds with his reputation as the stern, proper Duke of Thornbury. Rose should have refused. Should have recognized the danger inherent in this offer. Should have understood that no good could come from a commoner and a duke meeting in secret, even to discuss literature. But she didn't refuse. Because in that moment, looking at Edmund Ashford, she saw not a duke but simply a man who looked at her as though she mattered, as though her thoughts and opinions had value, as though the accident of her birth in a Whitechapel tenement didn't define everything she could be. "I'll come back," she heard herself say. "When I've finished the books." "Next Tuesday," Edmund said quickly, as though afraid she might change her mind. 7 o'clock. The servants will be preparing for dinner. No one will notice." "Tuesday," Rose agreed, and with that single word, sealed both their fates. Rose returned the following Tuesday, her heart pounding so hard she was certain the servants would hear it echoing through the corridors. She'd finished all 3 books, reading by candlelight until her eyes burned and her fingers cramped from holding the volumes. She'd laughed at Pip's misadventures, wept for Catherine and Heathcliff's doomed love, and felt her heart soar when Jane Eyre finally found her happiness. But more than the stories themselves, she'd thought about Edmund. The way his eyes had lit up when he talked about books. The casual grace of his movements. The moment when his carefully maintained ducal facade had cracked to reveal the lonely man beneath. She told herself this was merely about the books. About the opportunity to discuss literature with someone who actually cared about ideas rather than just gossip and survival. She was a practical woman, after all. She knew the rules of society. She knew her place. But her racing heart knew otherwise. Edmund was already in the library when she arrived, pacing before the fire like a caged lion. He spun around when she entered, and his face, God, his face, showed such naked relief that Rose felt her breath catch. "You came," he said, and there was wonder in his voice, as though he hadn't quite believed she would. "I finished the books," Rose replied, holding them out like an offering. "All 3. For the next 2 hours, they talked. They debated whether Mr. Rochester deserved Jane's forgiveness, whether Heathcliff was villain or victim, whether Pip's expectations had elevated or destroyed him. They discussed themes of class and dignity, of love and redemption, of the chains that bind us and the courage it takes to break free. Edmund was brilliant, sharp and witty, with opinions that challenged Rose's assumptions and made her defend her positions. But he also listened, truly listened, in a way that made Rose feel as though her thoughts were not just valid but valuable. "You're remarkable," Edmund said suddenly, in a moment of silence between arguments. "Do you know that?" Rose felt heat flood her cheeks. "I'm a seamstress, Your Grace." "Stop calling me that. Here, in this room, I'm just Edmund. And you're just Rose. No titles, no stations. Just 2 people who love books and conversation." "That's not possible," Rose whispered, though her heart soared at the words. "The world doesn't work that way." "Then perhaps the world is wrong." Edmund moved closer, close enough that Rose could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something citrus. "Perhaps there's more to a person than the circumstances of their birth." "Easy for a duke to say," Rose replied, but there was no malice in her words. "You can afford to be philosophical about class. I live it every day." "Then teach me," Edmund said intensely. "Show me what it's like. Your world, your life. I want to understand." And so Rose talked. She told him about the tenement where she lived, where 8 families shared a single water pump and the smell of unwashed bodies and desperation hung in the air like fog. She described 14-hour workdays sewing until her fingers bled, the constant fear of injury or illness that could leave her unable to work and therefore unable to eat. She told him about her mother, dead of consumption when Rose was 12, and her father, lost to a factory accident 2 years later. About teaching herself to read using newspapers left in the streets, about practicing her letters by scratching them in the dirt with sticks. She spoke of dreams deferred and hopes carefully rationed, of the small joys that sustained the poor, a perfect rose blooming in a crack in the pavement, a kind word from a stranger, the luxury of a full meal on Sunday. Edmund listened with an expression of growing horror and fascination. This was not the sanitized version of poverty he'd heard in parliamentary debates, where the poor were abstractions to be managed through legislation. This was real, raw, human. "I've been blind," he said when she finished. "We all have been. We sit in our mansions and our parliaments, making laws about people whose lives we can't even imagine." "Most of you never try to imagine," Rose said quietly. "That's what makes you different, Edmund." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and they both felt the intimacy of it like a physical touch. The library suddenly seemed smaller, warmer. The firelight cast shadows that danced across Edmund's face, and Rose realized with a jolt that she wanted to trace those shadows with her fingers, to smooth away the furrow between his brows. "I should go," she said abruptly, standing. "It's late. Mrs. Blackwood will notice if—" "Next Tuesday," Edmund interrupted. "Come back. Please, Rose. I need," he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I need this. These conversations. You. I need you." The confession hung between them like a lit fuse, dangerous and impossible to ignore. They both knew what was happening, even if neither dared speak it aloud. This had stopped being about books weeks ago. This was about two lonely souls finding unexpected connection across an unbridgeable divide. Tuesday, Rose agreed, and fled before her courage could fail her. The weeks that followed established a pattern that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. Every Tuesday evening, Rose would slip through the servants' entrance and make her way to the library. Every Tuesday evening, Edmund would be waiting, often with new books, always with that expression of desperate anticipation that made Rose's heart flutter. They talked about everything: literature and philosophy, politics and social reform, religion and science. Edmund brought her books by Darwin and Marx, by John Stuart Mill and Mary Wollstonecraft. Rose devoured them all, her keen intelligence and lived experience giving her insights that Edmund's expensive education had never provided. But they also talked about simpler things. Edmund described his childhood, the crushing weight of expectations, the loneliness of being groomed for a role rather than allowed to be a person. Rose shared memories of her mother's laughter, her father's calloused hands, the fierce community that existed among the poor despite or perhaps because of their suffering. They discovered unexpected commonalities. Both loved thunderstorms and hated small talk. Both had lost parents too young. Both felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control, Edmund by his title and duties, Rose by her poverty and class. And with each meeting, the air between them grew heavier with unspoken feelings. It was on a December evening, with snow falling softly outside the library windows, that everything changed. Rose arrived to find Edmund pacing frantically, his hair disheveled as though he'd been running his hands through it. He looked up when she entered, and the anguish in his eyes made her gasp. "What's wrong?" she asked, rushing to him without thought. "My mother," he said roughly. "The Duchess. She's arranging a marriage for me." Rose felt the words like a physical blow. "But you're already married. Lady Catherine died 3 years ago. Influenza." Edmund's voice was flat. "I've been a widower for 3 years, and my mother has decided it's time I remarry. She's invited Lady Victoria Pemberton and her family for Christmas. It's practically an announcement." Rose stood frozen, trying to process this information. Edmund was a widower, available, and being pushed toward another aristocratic marriage that would cement his position and produce the heirs expected of a duke. "Lady Victoria is lovely," Edmund continued, his voice bitter. "Beautiful, accomplished, perfectly bred for the role of Duchess. She'll look magnificent on my arm at social functions. She'll run my household efficiently. She'll produce sons who'll be raised exactly as I was raised, to be automatons in expensive clothes." "Then why?" Rose stopped, realizing the question was dangerous. But Edmund heard it anyway. "Why do I sound so miserable about a perfectly suitable match?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I don't want suitable, Rose. I don't want appropriate or proper or any of the other words that have governed my entire life. I want—" He stopped abruptly, but his eyes locked on hers, and the words he didn't speak hung between them like thunder before lightning. "Don't," Rose whispered. "Please don't say it." "Why not?" "Because it's improper. Because society says a duke shouldn't feel this way about a seamstress." Edmund moved closer, close enough that Rose could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I'm tired of society's rules, Rose. I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel every time you walk into this room." Edmund, his name was a plea, though Rose couldn't have said whether she was begging him to stop or to continue. "Tell me you don't feel it too," Edmund demanded. "Tell me these past months have meant nothing to you. Tell me you think of me as just a duke, a title, a station above yours. Tell me, and I'll stop. I'll let you go. I'll marry Lady Victoria and produce heirs and play my role until I die. But first, tell me the truth." Rose couldn't. Because the truth was written in every accelerated beat of her heart, In every night she'd lain awake thinking of his smile, in every word they'd shared that had wound around her soul like silk thread binding two pieces of fabric together. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't tell you that." Edmund's control shattered. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and cupped her face in his hands, hands that trembled despite their strength. "Rose," he breathed. "My Rose." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and catching fire simultaneously. Rose had been kissed before, clumsy fumbles with boys from her neighborhood who'd tasted of gin and desperation. But this was different. This was a kiss that spoke of longing held carefully in check, of desire that had been banked like coals waiting for oxygen. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. For one perfect, impossible moment, there was no duke and sempstress, no unbridgeable social divide, no impossible circumstances. There was only Edmund and Rose, 2 souls who'd found each other against all odds. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Edmund rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as though memorizing the moment. "This is madness," Rose whispered, though she made no move to step away. "Then let us be mad," Edmund replied. "Let us have this, even if we can have nothing else." And so began the most dangerous phase of their relationship, the phase where desire overcame caution, where stolen kisses became stolen hours, where the library ceased to be just a room for conversation and became a sanctuary where the rules of society held no sway. They knew it couldn't last. They knew discovery would mean ruin for Rose and scandal for Edmund. They knew every meeting was a gamble with stakes neither could afford to lose. But love, true, desperate, impossible love has never been known for its caution. December gave way to January, and with the new year came increased danger. Lady Victoria Pemberton had accepted Edmund's mother's invitation and was now a regular presence at Thornbury House. She was everything a duke's wife should be, beautiful in a cold, classical way, impeccably mannered, skilled in all the social graces expected of her class. She was also, Rose discovered, desperately unhappy. They'd encountered each other by accident one afternoon when Rose was delivering a repaired hem to the Duchess's chambers. Lady Victoria had been leaving those same chambers, her face composed but her eyes red-rimmed with recent tears. "You're the sempstress," Victoria said, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes, my lady." Rose Hartley. Victoria studied her with an intensity that made Rose uncomfortable. "You're very young. And pretty, in an unconventional way." There was something in her tone, not quite hostile, but probing. "I suppose that helps, in your profession." "I'm valued for my skill with a needle, my lady. Not my appearance." "Of course." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Tell me, Miss Hartley, do you believe in love? Real love, I mean. Not the kind in novels, but the messy, complicated kind that destroys as often as it saves." The question was so unexpected that Rose answered honestly. "I believe in it, yes. Though I also believe it's rarely practical." "Practical?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "No, I don't suppose love is practical. Especially not for women like us." "My lady." But Victoria had already swept past, leaving Rose standing in the corridor with a growing sense of unease. There had been something in the lady's eyes, a knowing look that suggested she saw more than she should. Rose's fears were confirmed the following Tuesday when she arrived at the library to find not Edmund but Lady Victoria waiting by the fire. Rose's blood turned to ice. She spun to leave, but Victoria's voice stopped her. "Please don't run, Miss Hartley. I'm not here to cause you harm." "My lady, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why a sempstress has access to the Duke's private library? Why you arrive every Tuesday at precisely 7 o'clock? Why Edmund, forgive me, His Grace, looks at you as though you're the only source of light in his darkness. Rose felt tears prick her eyes. This was it. Discovery. Ruin. Please, she whispered. Please don't tell the Duchess. I'll leave immediately. I'll never come back. Just please don't. Sit down, Victoria commanded, her voice sharp but not unkind. We need to talk. Trembling, Rose obeyed. Victoria poured 2 glasses of sherry from the decanter on Edmund's desk and handed one to Rose. Drink, she ordered. You look as though you might faint, and I need you coherent for this conversation. Rose took a sip, the alcohol burning her throat. Are you going to expose us? That depends. Victoria sat across from her, looking every inch the lady she was bred to be. Tell me, do you love him? Truly love him, not just the idea of being with a duke? I never wanted to love him, Rose said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I never asked for this. I know it's impossible. I know I'm nobody, that I have no right to even speak his name, much less, she stopped, unable to continue. Much less love him. Victoria finished softly. Oh, Miss Hartley. You poor, foolish girl. Don't you know? Love doesn't care about rights or stations. It simply is. Rose looked up, startled. You're not angry. Angry. Perhaps I should be. After all, I'm the woman being carefully positioned to become the next Duchess of Thornbury. But the truth is, Victoria paused, her composed mask cracking. I don't love Edmund. I barely know him. And I suspect he doesn't love me either. Our match is one of convenience, of suitable bloodlines and connected estates. It's what our world does, treats marriage like a business transaction and people like commodities to be traded. Then why accept the arrangement? Victoria's laugh was harsh. Because I have no choice. My father has debts that could swallow our estate whole. The Duke's support, financial and social, could save my family. So I'll marry Edmund, produce his heirs, and spend the rest of my life in a loveless union, just as my mother did, and her mother before her. It's what women of my class do. We sacrifice ourselves for duty. Rose felt unexpected sympathy for this woman who seemed to have everything but wanted none of it. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry for me. Be sorry for yourself. Victoria leaned forward, her expression intense. Because you're the one who'll lose everything, Miss Hartley. Edmund may love you, God knows I can see it in his eyes when he mentions your name, but love isn't enough to overcome the barriers between you. He's a duke. You're a seamstress. Society will never accept you as his wife, and if he tries to keep you as his mistress, the scandal will destroy you both. I know that, Rose whispered. I've always known. Then why continue? Why torture yourself with something that can never be? Rose looked into the fire, remembering Edmund's kiss, his laugh, the way his entire being seemed to light up when they talked. Because these stolen moments with him are worth the pain that will come after. Because I'd rather have this brief, impossible love than a lifetime of safety without it. Victoria was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle. You remind me of myself, years ago. Before the world taught me that passion is a luxury only the poor can afford. The wealthy trade it for security. You could refuse, Rose said suddenly. Tell the Duchess you won't marry him. And condemn my family to ruin. Disappoint my father, who's counted on this match. Become a social pariah. Victoria shook her head. No, Miss Hartley. I'm not brave enough for that. But perhaps, she hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Perhaps I'm brave enough for something else. My lady. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirts with practiced grace. I'll keep your secret. For now. But in return, I need you to understand something. This cannot end well. Edmund will eventually have to choose between love and duty always wins in our world. When that happens, you'll be the one left bleeding. Are you prepared for that? Rose met her eyes steadily. No, but I'm willing to face it anyway. Then God help you both. Victoria moved toward the door, then paused. He'll be here shortly. I sent him on an errand to give us time to talk. Use your time wisely, Miss Hartley. I suspect you have less of it than you think. And with that cryptic warning, she swept from the room, leaving Rose alone with her racing thoughts and her pounding heart. Edmund arrived 15 minutes later, breathless and anxious. Rose, thank God. Victoria said. He stopped, taking in her pale face and trembling hands. What did she say to you? If she threatened you, I swear I'll. She was kind, Rose interrupted. Surprisingly kind. But Edmund, she knows. About us. About our meetings. Edmund's face went white. Did she say she'd tell my mother? No. She said she'd keep our secret. But she also said this can't last. That eventually you'll have to choose, and that duty will win. Then she doesn't know me as well as she thinks. Edmund pulled Rose into his arms, holding her tightly enough that she could feel his heart racing against her cheek. I won't give you up. I don't care what society says. I don't care about scandal. I only care about you. Edmund, be reasonable. Reasonable? Is it reasonable to live a lie? To marry someone I don't love while the woman I'm desperately in love with lives in poverty and obscurity? His voice was passionate, almost angry. I've been reasonable my entire life, Rose. I've done everything expected of me. And I've been miserable. With you, I'm alive. I'm myself. Don't ask me to give that up. What are you saying? Rose pulled back to look at his face, almost afraid to understand. I'm saying I want more than stolen hours in a library. I want you beside me, properly, permanently. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want the world to know that you're mine and I'm yours. You're talking about marriage, Rose whispered. A duke marrying a sempstress. It's impossible. Your mother would disown you. Society would shun us. Your political career would be over. Then let it be over. Edmund's eyes blazed with determination. What good is power if I can't use it to choose my own life? What good is privilege if it chains me to misery? Before Rose could respond, the library door burst open. The Duchess of Thornbury stood in the doorway, her face a mask of cold fury. Behind her stood Mrs. Blackwood, looking grimly satisfied, and two footmen whose expressions suggested they'd been prepared for exactly this moment. Step away from my son, the Duchess commanded, her voice like ice over steel. Edmund kept his arm around Rose. Mother. I said step away from the girl. The Duchess's tone brooked no argument. Now, Edmund. Or I'll have the footman remove her forcibly. Slowly, reluctantly, Edmund released Rose. But he positioned himself between her and his mother, a human shield. This isn't what you think. Isn't it? Mrs. Blackwood has informed me that this person has been sneaking into your library every Tuesday for months. That you've been meeting her in secret, plying her with books and wine and God knows what else. The Duchess's eyes raked over Rose with contempt. What else could it be but a sordid attempt at seduction? She seduced no one, Edmund said hotly. If anything, I pursued her. She tried to refuse, but enough. The Duchess held up her hand. I don't need the lurid details. What I need is for this situation to be resolved immediately and permanently. She turned her glacial gaze on Rose. You, girl. What's your name? Rose Hartley, Your Grace. Rose's voice was steadier than she felt. Miss Hartley, I don't know what scheme you had in mind, but it ends tonight. You'll leave this house immediately and never return. Furthermore, I'll ensure that every respectable household in London knows that you're not to be trusted. You'll never work as a sempstress again, not for anyone of quality. Rose felt the words like hammer blows. The Duchess wasn't just dismissing her, she was destroying her livelihood, her future, everything she'd worked so hard to build. Your Grace, please. Mother, if you ruin her, I'll never forgive you. Edmund's voice was quiet but filled with steel. And I'll make certain everyone knows why you did it. The Duchess's eyes widened. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Ruin Rose, and I'll announce to all of London society that I'm in love with her. That she's innocent of any wrongdoing. That you're persecuting a poor woman simply because your son found her company preferable to the vapid socialites you keep throwing at him. The silence that followed was profound. The Duchess's face went through a remarkable transformation, from shock to fury to something that might have been fear. Because Edmund had just threatened to create exactly the kind of scandal that could permanently damage the family's reputation. You're bluffing, the Duchess said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. Am I? Edmund's smile was cold. Shall we find out? I could ride to the offices of the Times right now. Have the story in tomorrow's morning edition. Duke of Thornbury defends true love against class prejudice. I think it would sell rather well, don't you? The Duchess's jaw tightened. She was trapped, and she knew it. What do you want? I want Rose left alone. No ruined reputation, no blacklisting, no persecution of any kind. She's done nothing wrong. She's guilty only of being too kind to refuse my invitations. And in return, I'll end it. I'll marry Lady Victoria. I'll play the role of dutiful duke and never see Rose again. Each word seemed to cost him, but Edmund spoke them clearly. But only if you leave her untouched. Only if you allow her to continue her work and build her life without interference. Rose gasped. Edmund, no. It's done, Rose. He didn't look at her, couldn't look at her, or his resolve might crumble. Mother, do we have an agreement? The Duchess studied her son with an expression Rose couldn't read. Pride. Disappointment. Begrudging respect. We have an agreement. The girl can go unmolested. But you, she pointed at Rose, will leave this house tonight and never contact my son again. No letters, no messages, no attempts at communication. Is that clear? Yes, Your Grace, Rose whispered, though her heart was breaking. Then get out. Before I change my mind. Rose fled. She ran through the corridors of Thornbury House, half blind with tears, expecting any moment to be stopped by servants or footmen. But no one stopped her. She made it to the servants' entrance, out into the cold January night, and kept running. She didn't stop until she reached her tenement, where she collapsed on her narrow bed and wept as though her heart was being torn from her chest. Because in saving her, Edmund had destroyed them both. 3 months passed. 3 months of Rose going through the motions of living while feeling entirely hollow inside. She worked, she ate, she slept. But it was existence, not life. The colour had gone out of the world. True to the Duchess's word, Rose hadn't been blacklisted. In fact, she'd received more commissions than ever, as though word of her skill had somehow spread through society. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt numb. She never saw Edmund. She read about him in the society pages, his engagement to Lady Victoria Pemberton, the elaborate wedding being planned for June, the political successes he was achieving in the House of Lords. He looked handsome in the photographs, proper and ducal and entirely unlike the passionate man who'd kissed her in the library. Rose told herself this was for the best. That their love had been impossible from the start. That she should be grateful for the memories and move on with her life. But at night, alone in her room, she ached for him with an intensity that scared her. Then, in April, a letter arrived. It was delivered by a boy she'd never seen, who pressed it into her hand and disappeared before she could ask questions. The envelope was expensive, sealed with red wax but no identifying crest. Inside, in elegant handwriting she recognized immediately, was a single page. My dearest Rose. I hope this letter finds you well, though I suspect we're both as miserable as two people can be. I've honored my agreement with my mother, I've stayed away, announced my engagement, played my role perfectly. But I can't do it anymore. I'm supposed to marry Victoria in June. Go through with a ceremony that will bind me to a woman I respect but don't love, while the woman I'm desperately in love with lives less than 5 miles away but might as well be on another continent. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know I chose duty over love, protection over passion. I know I hurt you. But Rose, I need to see you one more time. Not to change anything, I'm not fool enough to think that's possible. Just to see you. To talk to you. To remember what it feels like to be myself instead of just a duke. There's a garden party at Thornbury House next Saturday. My mother is hosting, and half of London society will be there. Among the invited guests is Mrs. Henrietta Blackwell, a patroness of the arts who has a reputation for bringing unexpected guests, artists, writers, musicians. Anyone interesting enough to enliven her conversation. Mrs. Blackwell owes me a favor. If you were to appear at her townhouse at noon on Saturday, dressed in suitable attire, which I've taken the liberty of having made for you, forgive my presumption, she would bring you as her guest. You would be just another interesting person in her entourage, unremarkable to anyone who wasn't looking for you. But I'll be looking for you, Rose. I'll find you in that crowd, and we'll have one afternoon. One final afternoon to say the things we should have said, to be the people we are instead of the people society demands we be. I know this is dangerous. I know it's selfish. I know I'm asking you to risk exposure and scandal for a few stolen hours. You have every right to refuse, and I'll understand if you do. But if you love me even a fraction as much as I love you, please come. Yours always, Edmund P.S. The dress will be delivered tomorrow. No one will question a seamstress receiving fabric and garments to work on. If you choose not to come, keep it anyway. You'll look magnificent in it. Rose read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling. This was madness. Attending a garden party at Thornbury House, where Edmund's mother and fiancé would both be present. Where one wrong word or gesture could expose them both. But oh, how she wanted to see him again. Just one more time. One final afternoon before he married someone else and their impossible love became nothing but memory. The dress arrived the next day, as promised. It was beautiful, a confection of pale blue silk with delicate embroidery, neither too grand nor too simple. The dress of a respectable woman of some means, appropriate for a garden party without being so extravagant as to draw excessive attention. Rose stood before her small mirror, holding the dress against her body, and made her decision. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Mrs. Henrietta Blackwell was exactly as eccentric as her reputation suggested. She arrived at her townhouse Saturday morning in a carriage painted with peacocks and immediately informed Rose that she found the whole situation deliciously romantic and absolutely doomed. "I do love a tragic love story," Mrs. Blackwell declared, adjusting Rose's hat to a more fashionable angle. "And you, my dear, are living one. The Duke is a fool, of course. All men are. But he's a well-meaning fool, which is rare enough. Come along. Let's see if we can give you one perfect afternoon before reality comes crashing down." The Thornbury House gardens were magnificent in late April. Flowers bloomed in riots of colour, trees provided dappled shade, and white pavilions had been erected to shelter the guests from sun or unexpected rain. Ladies in elaborate dresses promenaded on the arms of gentlemen in mourning coats. Servants circulated with trays of champagne and delicate canapés. Rose felt entirely out of place, certain that everyone could see she was an impostor, a commoner dressed in borrowed finery. But Mrs. Blackwell kept up a steady stream of amusing commentary, introducing Rose to various people as my young protégé, a most talented artist, and generally deflecting attention with practiced skill. Then Rose saw him. Edmund stood near the rose garden, ostensibly in conversation with several other gentlemen. But his eyes were scanning the crowd with barely concealed anxiety. He looked tired, Rose thought. Thinner than he'd been in January, with new lines around his eyes. Their gazes met across the garden, and the world seemed to stop. Edmund excused himself from his companions and began moving toward her, not hurrying but walking with clear purpose. Rose's heart hammered against her ribs. Mrs. Blackwell squeezed her arm once, whispered 20 minutes, no more, and drifted away to join another group. "Miss Hartley," Edmund said when he reached her, his voice carefully neutral. To anyone watching, he was merely greeting one of Mrs. Blackwell's guests. "I'm pleased you could attend. Have you seen the rose garden? It's particularly lovely this year." "I haven't, Your Grace." Rose's voice was steady despite her inner turmoil. "I should very much like to see it." They walked side by side, maintaining proper distance, the picture of aristocrat and respectable guest engaged in polite conversation. But Rose could feel the tension radiating from Edmund, the barely controlled emotion that matched her own. The rose garden was at the far end of the property, partially screened by hedges. Once they were hidden from the main party, Edmund turned to her, his composure cracking. "Rose," he breathed. "God, I've missed you. I've missed you so much it feels like dying." "Edmund. I know this is our last time. I know I'm marrying Victoria in 8 weeks. I know every single reason why we can't be together. But right now, for just a few moments, can we pretend? Can we pretend the world is different? That love is enough." Rose felt tears slide down her cheeks. "We could run away. Leave England. Go somewhere no one knows us. You could give up your title, and we could just be Edmund and Rose, ordinary people living ordinary lives." "I've thought of that 1,000 times." Edmund reached out as though to touch her face, then stopped himself, remembering where they were. "But I can't, Rose. The estates depend on me. Thousands of people work on Thornbury lands, farmers, servants, tradesmen. If I abandon my duties, they suffer. I can't be that selfish." "But you can be selfish enough to marry someone you don't love. To sentence both yourself and Victoria to a lifetime of misery." "Victoria understands. We've talked about it. She'll have security, position, children if she wants them. I'll have duty fulfilled and my mother satisfied. It's not ideal, but it's what our world requires." "And what about love?" Rose's voice broke. "What about us?" Edmund's control shattered. He pulled her behind a tall hedge, out of sight of even the most curious eyes, and kissed her with desperate passion. Rose kissed him back just as desperately, knowing this was goodbye, that once they left this garden they would never touch again. When they finally broke apart, both were crying. "I love you," Edmund said fiercely. "I'll love you until I die. Every morning when I wake up, I'll think of you. Every night before I sleep, I'll remember this moment. You'll be with me always, even when you're not beside me." "That's not enough," Rose sobbed. "It's not enough, Edmund." "I know. God help me, I know." They heard voices approaching, other guests wandering toward the rose garden. Edmund stepped back quickly, wiping his eyes and resuming his ducal composure with visible effort. Rose did the same, trying to compose herself enough to return to the party without causing scandal. "Go with Mrs. Blackwell," Edmund said quietly. "Leave soon. Don't look back at me, or I won't be able to let you go." Rose nodded, unable to speak. She turned away, ready to walk back toward the main party and out of Edmund's life forever. Then Lady Victoria's voice cut through the air like a knife. "How touching! The Duke and the sempstress, stealing one last moment before duty calls." They spun around. Victoria stood at the edge of the hedge, her expression unreadable. Behind her, to Rose's horror, stood the Duchess, her face a mask of cold fury. They'd been caught. And this time, there would be no negotiation, no deals, no escape. The silence that followed Victoria's announcement was suffocating. The Duchess stepped forward, her eyes like chips of ice, her entire bearing radiating aristocratic rage. "I should have known you couldn't be trusted," she said to Rose, ignoring her son entirely. "You gave your word to stay away, but clearly a commoner's word means nothing." "She didn't seek me out," Edmund interjected, moving to stand between his mother and Rose. "I invited her. I arranged everything. If you want to blame someone, blame me." "Oh, I do blame you," the Duchess replied coldly. "But I also know that without this woman's willing participation, none of this would have been possible. She could have refused your invitation. She could have shown some shred of decency and self-respect." "Your Grace," Victoria said suddenly, her voice surprising everyone with its strength, "perhaps we might discuss this somewhere more private. The guests are none the wiser, as they're all on the other side of the property. But you're right. This conversation should not happen here." The Duchess turned to Rose with barely concealed contempt. "You will come to my private sitting room immediately. Edmund, you will accompany us. Lady Victoria, I believe you've earned the right to witness this conversation as well." It was a nightmare walk back through the gardens, through the house, up the stairs to the Duchess's private chambers. Rose felt like a prisoner being led to execution. Edmund walked beside her, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. Once in the sitting room, an elegantly appointed space that felt more like a courtroom, the Duchess closed the door and turned to face them all. "Let me be perfectly clear about the situation," she began, her voice controlled but vibrating with anger. "Edmund, you are engaged to Lady Victoria. The wedding is in 8 weeks. Invitations have been sent to every important family in England. The Queen herself has indicated she'll attend. There is no possibility of cancellation without causing a scandal that would rock society to its foundations." "I don't care about scandal," Edmund said. "Of course you don't. You're a man, and a duke. You'll weather any scandal with nothing more than some whispers and knowing looks. But this girl," she gestured at Rose with disdain, "will be utterly destroyed. As will Lady Victoria, whose reputation will be ruined by association with a broken engagement. And your family name, which I have spent my entire life protecting, will become synonymous with disgrace." "So what do you propose, Your Grace?" Rose asked, finding her voice at last. "You've made it clear you despise me and want me gone from Edmund's life. What will satisfy you?" The Duchess studied her with something that might have been grudging respect. "You speak up for yourself. I'll grant you that. Very well. Here is what will happen. Edmund will marry Lady Victoria as planned. You will leave London immediately. I'll arrange passage to America or Australia, wherever you'd like to go. I'll even provide you with enough money to start a new life. But you will go, and you will never attempt to contact my son again." "You're trying to buy me off," Rose said flatly. "I'm offering you a chance at a life free from the scandal that will inevitably follow if you stay. You're young, reasonably attractive, and apparently quite skilled at your trade. In a new country, you could build a respectable life for yourself. Here, You'll always be the sempstress who tried to seduce a duke. I never tried to, Rose stopped, feeling the futility of the argument. It doesn't matter what I say. You've already decided who I am and what I'm worth. I know exactly what you're worth, the Duchess replied. You're worth 8 weeks of my son's attention, nothing more. He'll mourn you briefly, then settle into his proper life with a proper wife. You're a distraction, Miss Hartley. An aberration. Nothing more. Mother, that's enough. Edmund's voice was dangerous. You will not speak to Rose that way. I'll speak to her however I please. This is my house, and she's here only because I'm allowing this conversation instead of having her thrown out by the servants. Victoria, who'd been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke. Actually, Your Grace, this is not entirely your house. It's Edmund's house. He's the Duke. And while I don't presume to tell him how to manage his property or his life, I think perhaps you're overstepping. Everyone turned to stare at her. Victoria met the Duchess's gaze steadily, her composure perfect but her eyes fierce. Lady Victoria, the Duchess began, surely you can see that this situation requires. What I see, Victoria interrupted an almost unforgivable breach of etiquette that made even the Duchess pause, is a man in love with someone he cannot have, a woman being villainized for the crime of being loved, and a marriage based on nothing but social expectation and financial convenience. She turned to Edmund. Tell me honestly, Your Grace. If there were no consequences, no scandal, no social pressure, what would you choose? Edmund looked at Rose, and his answer was written plainly on his face before he even spoke. Her. Always her. And you, Miss Hartley. If Edmund were free to choose you, would you have him? Knowing that it would mean living in a society that would never fully accept you. That would whisper about you behind your back and judge you for the rest of your life. Rose met Edmund's eyes. Yes. I'd face anything to be with him. Victoria nodded slowly, as though something had been confirmed. Then she did something that shocked everyone in the room. She removed her engagement ring, a massive diamond that caught the light like a star, and placed it carefully on the table between them. Then I'm releasing you from our engagement, Edmund. Effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria, Edmund began. Let me finish. Victoria's voice was calm but firm. I don't love you, Edmund. I've tried to convince myself that respect and compatibility would be enough, but I've watched you these past months, and I've realized something. You're dying inside. Slowly, perhaps, but dying nonetheless. And I refuse to be the cause of that death. This is madness, the Duchess breathed. Lady Victoria, think about what you're doing. Your family will survive. My father's debts will be paid another way. I'll find a husband who wants a wife, not a business arrangement. Or perhaps I won't marry at all. Perhaps I'll shock society and become one of those scandalous women who lives independently and doesn't care what anyone thinks. Victoria smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Rose had seen on her face. The truth is, watching you two has made me realize that I want what you have. Not the impossibility of it, but the passion, the certainty, the willingness to risk everything for love. You're throwing away your future, the Duchess said harshly. No, Your Grace. I'm claiming it. For the first time in my life, I'm making a choice that's mine, not my family's, not society's, not anyone's but mine. Victoria turned to Rose. Miss Hartley, take care of him. Make him happy. And perhaps, someday, I'll find someone who looks at me the way he looks at you. She walked to the door, paused, and looked back. Edmund, you owe me nothing. But if you truly want to be with Rose, you're going to have to fight for her. Fight your mother, fight society, fight the entire world if necessary. Can you do that? Edmund looked at Rose, then at his mother, then back at Victoria. When he spoke, his voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Yes, I can do that." What followed was the most intense negotiation Rose had ever witnessed. The Duchess deployed every argument she could muster: social pressure, political ramifications, the impact on the family estates, the scandal that would affect every servant and dependent who relied on the Thornbury name. Edmund countered each argument with calm determination. He would maintain his political position. He would manage the estates responsibly. He would weather the scandal. And he would marry Rose, with or without his mother's blessing. "You'll be ostracized," the Duchess warned. "No one will receive you. The Queen herself will withdraw her favor. Then I'll create a new circle. The world is changing, Mother. The old rules are breaking down. I'm not the first aristocrat to marry outside his class, and I won't be the last. But you are a duke. The standard is different for someone of your position. Then perhaps the standard needs to change." The argument raged for over an hour. But slowly, inexorably, the Duchess began to realize that her son would not be moved. He was willing to sacrifice everything: position, social standing, even his relationship with his mother, to be with Rose. Finally, the Duchess sank into a chair, looking older than her years. "If I cannot change your mind, then I suppose I have no choice but to accept your decision. But know this, Edmund, I will never approve. I will never welcome this woman as your wife. And I will never forgive you for throwing away everything I've worked to build." "I can live with that," Edmund said quietly. "Can you live with losing your son?" The question hung in the air like smoke. The Duchess's face worked with emotion, anger, disappointment, and something that might have been fear. "If you do this," she said finally, "if you marry this seamstress, society will tear you apart. The scandal will be enormous. Every door will close to you. Your children, if you have children, will be considered tainted by her common blood. Is that really what you want?" Edmund reached for Rose's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "What I want is to spend every day of my life with the woman I love. Everything else is secondary." Rose felt tears slide down her face. "Edmund, are you sure? Once you do this, there's no going back. You'll lose everything you've known." "I won't lose everything." Edmund squeezed her hand. "I'll have you. That's not everything, it's the only thing that matters." The Duchess stood abruptly. "Then I wash my hands of this situation. Marry your seamstress if you must. But don't expect me to attend the wedding. Don't expect me to accept her as family. And don't come crying to me when you realize what you've sacrificed for a few moments of passion." She swept from the room, leaving Edmund and Rose alone. In the silence that followed, Rose felt the full weight of what had just happened settle on her shoulders. Edmund had chosen her. Against all odds, despite all obstacles, he'd chosen her. But the cost would be staggering. "Are you having second thoughts?" Edmund asked softly, reading her expression. "Are you?" Rose countered. "Never. Not for a single moment." Edmund pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "But I need you to understand what we're facing. It won't be easy, Rose. Society will be cruel. We'll be excluded from events, snubbed by people we thought were friends. Our lives will be difficult in ways neither of us can fully anticipate. I've lived a difficult life, Edmund. Poverty is difficult. Hunger is difficult. Working 14 hours a day until your hands bleed is difficult. Facing all that will be easy compared to living without you." Edmund kissed her then, softly, sweetly, a kiss that tasted of tears and joy and the terrifying freedom of choosing love over safety. "When?" Rose asked when they finally pulled apart. "Soon. As soon as possible. Before my mother has time to mount a campaign against us. Before society can organize its defenses. We'll marry quietly, quickly, and then face whatever comes together. Together, Rose echoed, and the word felt like a vow. 5 years later. The house in Hampstead was modest by Duke's standards. No marble columns, no grand ballrooms, no army of servants. But it had a garden where roses bloomed wild and unruly, large windows that let in floods of natural light, and enough rooms for a family. Rose stood at the kitchen window, watching Edmund play with their daughter Eleanor in the garden. At 3 years old, Eleanor had her father's blue eyes and her mother's independent spirit. She was currently helping Edmund plant vegetables by digging enthusiastic holes in random locations while he patiently redirected her efforts. The scandal of their marriage had been every bit as massive as predicted. The newspapers had run stories for months. Society had shut them out completely. Edmund's mother hadn't spoken to them since the wedding. A simple ceremony in a small church with Mrs. Blackwell and a handful of Edmund's more progressive friends in attendance. But they'd survived. More than survived, they'd thrived. Edmund had resigned from the House of Lords but maintained his estates through careful management and progressive reforms that had actually increased productivity. He'd written a book about social reform that had become surprisingly influential. He'd found a new circle of friends, artists, writers, reformers, people who valued ideas over bloodlines. Rose had expanded her sewing business into a workshop that employed a dozen women from Whitechapel, paying them fair wages and treating them with dignity. She'd taught herself accounting and business management. She'd become a respected businesswoman in her own right, no longer defined by her husband's title but by her own achievements. Their life wasn't the one Edmund had been born to, but it was richer, fuller, more genuine. They'd traded gilded cages for authentic freedom. A knock at the door interrupted Rose's thoughts. She answered it to find an unexpected visitor. The Duchess of Thornbury, looking older and frailer than Rose remembered, leaning heavily on a cane. "Your Grace," Rose said, too surprised to remember the formal curtsy. "Mrs. Ashford," the Duchess replied, using Rose's married name for the first time. "May I come in?" Rose stepped aside, her heart racing. What could this visit mean after 5 years of silence? The Duchess entered slowly, her eyes taking in the comfortable, unpretentious home. She saw the books overflowing from shelves, the sketches Eleanor had drawn displayed proudly on walls, the evidence of a life lived with love if not luxury. "Is my son here?" the Duchess asked. "In the garden. With Eleanor. Your granddaughter." Something flickered across the Duchess's face. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "I've never met her." "No. You haven't." The Duchess was silent for a long moment. Then, so quietly Rose almost didn't hear, "I've been wrong about many things. But perhaps nothing so wrong as this." Rose's throat tightened. "Would you like to meet her? Eleanor? Would she want to meet me? I'm a stranger to her. She's 3. Every person is an adventure." Rose paused. "And she should know her grandmother." They walked together to the garden. Edmund looked up, saw his mother, and froze. Eleanor, oblivious to the tension, immediately toddled over to the new person. "Hello," she announced cheerfully. "I'm Eleanor. We're planting carrots, but Papa says I keep putting them in wrong. Would you like to help?" The Duchess stared down at this small, perfect person, her granddaughter, and something in her face cracked. She sank to her knees with difficulty, not caring that the dirt would stain her expensive dress. "Hello, Eleanor," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm your grandmother, and I would very much like to help plant carrots." Over Eleanor's head, the Duchess met Rose's eyes. No words were spoken, but Rose understood the apology, the regret, the tentative offer of peace. It wouldn't fix everything. Years of hurt couldn't be undone in a moment. But it was a beginning. As I bring this story to a close, I want you to think about what Edmund and Rose's tale really means. Because this isn't just a story about forbidden love, it's a story about the courage to choose authenticity over comfort, passion over propriety, truth over tradition. Edmund could have done what was expected. Married Victoria, maintained his position, lived a life of quiet desperation cushioned by wealth and status. Millions of people throughout history have made exactly that choice, and who can blame them? Safety is seductive. Security is logical. The known, however unsatisfying, feels safer than the unknown. But Edmund chose differently. He chose love, knowing full well it would cost him everything he'd been raised to value. That's not romantic foolishness, it's revolutionary courage. And Rose. She could have walked away. Should have walked away, by every practical measure. She had nothing to gain and everything to lose by pursuing an impossible love with a duke. But she chose to stay, to fight, to believe that her love was worth the sacrifice. Their story asks us uncomfortable questions. What would we choose if faced with the same decision? Would we have the courage to step outside the boundaries society draws around us? Would we be willing to pay the price for authentic happiness? The Victorian era may be long past, but the forces that tried to keep Edmund and Rose apart still exist. They're just more subtle now. We still have expectations about who should love whom, about what constitutes a suitable match, about staying within the boundaries of our social class or culture or community. And we still face the choice Edmund and Rose faced. Do we accept these boundaries, or do we have the courage to cross them? I don't know what you would choose. But I know that Edmund and Rose's story reminds us that sometimes the impossible becomes possible simply because someone dares to believe it could be. Their love didn't conquer all obstacles painlessly. It wasn't magic. It was work, compromise, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to each other even when the world told them to give up. But it endured. And perhaps that's the most important lesson. That love worth having is love worth fighting for, even when, especially when, the fight seems impossible. As you leave this story and return to your own life, carry this question with you. What impossible thing would you be willing to fight for? What boundaries would you dare to cross? What would you sacrifice for the sake of authentic love, genuine connection, and the freedom to choose your own path? Because in the end, Edmund and Rose's story isn't really about a duke and a seamstress. It's about all of us, every person who's ever felt constrained by society's expectations, every soul who's longed for something more than the life mapped out for them, every heart that's dared to love across forbidden boundaries. Their story is our story. The only difference is whether we have the courage to write our own ending.